Welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Tom Fernelli. That's Bud Elliott. I'm Chip Patterson coming to you live on CBS Sports Network. Very excited to be rocking with you for the next hour. Big show on deck. We'll be getting into one of the most notable starting quarterback decisions that we have in the entire country, as well as some of the quarterback battles we've got our eyes on. Some recruiting news, as we are starting to get a lot of big commitments here in the late portion of the summer. But we begin with the AP Top 25 that was released on Monday. It sets the stage, the starting point for everything involving the top teams in the country competing against each other. So Georgia starts the year at number 1. That's no surprise. Ohio State at number 2. You've got the rest of the top 10, very similar to what you saw at the coaches poll or at the CBS Sports 134. Oregon at 3, Texas at 4, Alabama, Ole Miss, Notre Dame, Penn State, Michigan, and Florida State rounding it out. But this top 10 is important, gentlemen, because we're going to pull out the history books. In 20 of the last 21 seasons, at least one team from the top 10 in the preseason poll has finished the season unranked outside of the top 25. Last year, it was the USC Trojans. They were number 6 in the preseason poll, 7-5 in the regular season, 8-5 at the end of the year after they won the Holiday Bowl, but they finished the year unranked. So if history is to hold like it did in 20 of the last 21 seasons, who will be this year's top 10 team that finishes the year unranked? Tom, I'm going to let you get first crack at this one.
First, I'm going to say that I believe that trend becomes 20 of the last 22 seasons after this year, because as I look at this top 10, I see plenty of teams that might fall out and still be ranked and not be in the top 10 at the end of the year. But I just think, honestly, with the way that the sport is consolidating into 2 main conferences, we are going to see voters change the way they approach looking at teams who lose games. And you're going to see more 3 and 4 loss teams hanging around the top 10 just based on the conference where they play in. Because if you put that graphic back up again, you'll notice 8 of the 10 teams in that top 10 come from 2 specific leagues. But for the sake of this exercise, I'll pick one of the 2 teams that isn't from one of those 2 main leagues. I'm sorry to do this to you, Bud, but I'm taking Florida State. Again, I don't think Florida State's going to have a season where they finish unranked, but I do think of those 10 teams, based on how we saw the college football playoff selection treat the Seminoles last year and just the kind of national narrative surrounding the Seminoles, if they lose their big games against Miami, Clemson, and Notre Dame, that's 3 losses right there. And if they slip up somewhere else along the way and they're 8-4 with no good wins, perhaps Florida State gets left out of the top 25. Perhaps DJ Uiagalelei is not the rock that they're hoping for at quarterback to help keep the ship steady. Perhaps the wide receiver situation isn't as good as we saw last year when it was filled with NFL players. Perhaps the offensive line isn't stalwart, and maybe the secondary isn't elite. I think the defensive line, no matter how many games they lose, is going to be one of the best in the country. So I don't really see the floor falling out beneath the Seminoles, but of those 10 teams, I guess I'll just go with the one that's ranked the lowest to start.
Tom, I think you're really onto something there with the logic, right? And to me, in my personal power ratings, less than a field goal separates like the number 4 team from the number 16 team. So I don't like top 10 is an arbitrary cutoff. So I agree. This probably will happen this year. And full disclosure, I was sick yesterday when the rundown was being made. So you guys actually took probably my top 2 choices here. But because I had to go last, I'm going to have to go with the Michigan Wolverines, who are decided underdogs in 3 games this year. I think they're the only team in the top 10 that will be a point spread underdog 3 times. They're still trying to decide on quarterback. Will it be Alex Orji? Will it be Jack Tuttle? If it's not Alex Orji, what does that say about this team? Because can you name the Michigan starting receivers? A lot of people out there can't. I don't think they're really all that great. So if you go with the pocket passer, what does that say about Orji? Maybe he can't throw. I'm hoping it's going to be Orji. I hope that Michigan does not finish unranked. And to be honest, it's probably not a great pick anyway, because I think the other 9 teams on this schedule probably can't block Michigan's defense. But I have to pick somebody because it's a TV show. I'm going to go with the team that's actually already an underdog 3 times according to Vegas. So give me Michigan.
Hey, Bud, you can always break the rules, all right? They're letting daggum podcasters on CBS Sports Network now. We can always be able to get out there and break the rules. So I guess that you would have a little bit of confidence then in my pick here. And I'm going to spotlight a team that already has had some negative headlines. It's the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I mean, they just lost left tackle Charles Jagusa for the season. And they're already replacing 2 tackles. I mean, we were here on the CBS Sports Network, telling you how important of an injury that was, especially when you've got new quarterback Riley Leonard, who has a little bit of an injury history, especially when you've got, a new offensive coordinator and you've got all these wide receivers that you've really tried to make, a real prominent part of what the offense is going to be. But look, if you can't block, you can't throw. And so I think Notre Dame right now is going to be favored in a lot of games on the schedule. But what happens if they lose to a team that they should beat? And what happens if they cannot win in their biggest games? Because a loss to Texas A&M might take Notre Dame out of the top 10. It won't make them unranked. But lose to Louisville or go and lose to Georgia Tech in Atlanta, those kinds of losses will have the Fighting Irish plummeting down the rankings because, frankly, there are just not enough quality opponents on this schedule. So if you're going to tell me that Notre Dame is going to be in the college football playoff, and the first reason that you mention is their schedule, then I will challenge that also might be one of the reasons why they are not going to be able to stay in the top 25 should they lose games, because if they don't have quality wins, they've got no way to be able to hang up inside the top 25. So with injuries already rearing their ugly head, with some of the turnover that we've had from last year, I'm already looking at the Fighting Irish, again, of those top 10 teams, as a team that potentially could end up finishing the year unranked.
And Chip, I don't know if you saw, but
clearly
the last 2 practices.
Go ahead, bud.
The last 2 practices, they've actually been running true freshman Antoine Knapp at left tackle to replace Charles. So that's a huge deal. I thought it was going to be Tosh Baker. I don't know if Tosh Baker's not living up to the billing, but good luck in College Station on that opening night. I'm sure Nick Scorton will be extremely excited to face off against a guy who probably should have been in prom just 3 months ago.
Yeah, no, for sure. But Chip, I was saying, I think you and I were clearly part of the problem, because at least Bud went out on a limb and picked the defending national champions to fall out of the top 25. You and me, we go for the easy pickings. We take the only 2 teams in the top 10 that aren't in the Big Ten and the SEC and say, yeah, they'll get rid of them in a heartbeat. But I think Notre Dame, honestly, I took Florida State, but I think the Irish are a very good call as far as the 10 teams, because as you mentioned, losing Jagusa at left tackle is huge, considering you're already replacing Joe Alt. You're already replacing Blake Fisher at right tackle. You have a quarterback last year in Riley Leonard who missed a lot of time because he was banged up and is mostly a more mobile quarterback than he is a passer at this stage in his career. So you take away the guy responsible for defending his blind side. This is a team that, when you look at the teams in the top 10, obviously Notre Dame's talented. Like, they have done an excellent job of bringing players in, but I don't know if they have that kind of depth overall as a lot of the other teams in the top 10. So if they're already suffering injuries now, that's a team who might be another 2 or 3 injuries away from completely falling apart and having a very disappointing season.
Now, that was 20 of the last 21 seasons. A top 10 team from the AP preseason poll has finished unranked outside of the top 25. Let's go with an even longer trend. In 28 of the last 30 seasons, at least one team that has started the AP top 25 poll preseason unranked has finished up inside the top 10. Last year, that was the Missouri Tigers, unranked in the preseason. They finish up at number 8. So, Bud, let's go into others receiving votes. Let's go even off the board entirely. Maybe someone who got 0 votes in the preseason polling. But who do you have identified as a team that can go from unranked in the preseason to top 10 by the end of the year?
Chip, let's kind of stay in the Midwest here. I'm going to go Iowa State. Iowa State, a team that last year started really poorly. They had the whole gambling scandal. They were in disarray to start the season. They lost to Ohio, not Ohio State, but to MAC team Ohio, and they turned it around to have a pretty nice season. Freshman quarterback Rocco Becht can really sling it. They're one of the top teams in terms of returning production in the country. And despite, they won't be favored in every game, but I only have them as a touchdown or more underdog in just one game, that trip to Utah. They'll be favored in most, very close, but you could win a lot of different coin flips here, and I could really see it with this Iowa State team. Nice quarterback, skill position receivers like Jalen Noel, really good, always a salty defense. I think the path is there for Iowa State, if they're just a little bit better than people think, to actually win a lot of these coin flip games and end up in the top 10.
I love that call, but I do not hold the loss to Ohio against the Cyclones last year. You might recall that Ohio was a wagon, and that tends to happen when you get in the way of a wagon. I had to deny my inner homer here because I really wanted to go with my Fighting Illini of Illinois as the team that shocks everybody and goes in the top 10, but I decided to go a little more realistic. I'm taking a team that has received votes already in the AP poll, even if they didn't crack the top 25. Give me Virginia Tech, a team that I think has a couple of things coming together, both from a schedule perspective and from a talent perspective, to maybe make a surprising run in an ACC that I think we all agree Clemson, Florida State, and Miami are the top tier of the league, but there's somewhat of a soft underbelly beneath those three and plenty of room for improvements. I'm a big Kyron Drones fan. He transferred into Virginia Tech from Baylor last year, took over the starting job early in the season. He is not a complete and perfect quarterback yet, but when I watched the tape, he showed a lot of flashes and a lot of potential. And I think going into his second season in this offense with some talented players around him at receiver, some good running backs, and an offensive line that I felt improved as the year went on, this is a Tech team that I think, if you look at that schedule, can take advantage of some of those games and get to that 9-win area if everything breaks right. And I think if Virginia Tech ends up 9-3, there's a very good shot they're going to end up in the top 10, and they'll definitely be in the playoff conversation.
Yeah, I'm right around you in terms of like where in the voting I'm picking. It's right outside of the top 25, but it's a team that I think is going to be favored in a lot of games. Now, do I think the Boise State Broncos will be favored when they play Oregon? I do not. But if you want to think about voters, what if Boise State goes in and is respectable in that game? What if it is I haven't said this in a long time, a quality loss for the Broncos, where you come out feeling, more enthused about Boise State based on the way they handled their business in Eugene. The rest of the schedule sets up for them to have one of those double-digit win seasons that has them going higher and higher and higher and higher in the rankings, especially if they are starting just outside of the top 25. So with a strong starting position, with a schedule that sets up for a lot of good winnable opportunities, I'm looking at Boise State with one of the best running backs in the country in Ashton Jeanty back from last year's campaign. I think Boise State could be a team that climbs up inside the top 10 by the end of the year. So that's where we got with the rankings. We'll have games soon. We'll have games coming up in about a week and a half. But not every team in the country has decided on their starting quarterback. One very important team has, others have not. We'll get into the big news coming out of Columbus, plus the quarterback battles that we've got our eye on and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network, talking quarterback battles. Because as fall camp continues, we're going to get QB1s named left and right. We got a couple in the Big Ten. Earlier in the week, we got Tyler Van Dyke named as the starting quarterback at Wisconsin. But it was the announcement on Thursday that got our attention as we look ahead to the start of the year in the Big Ten with the Ohio State Buckeyes, the Big Ten favorite, because Ryan Day has announced that, yes, Will Howard, the transfer from Kansas State, will be QB1 for the opener. Now, that quarterback room is loaded with talent right now. You've got Devin Brown, you've got Julian Sayin, you've got Lincoln Kienholz, you've got Aaron Nolan, multiple blue chips, about a handful of them. So as we look at Will Howard, now officially the QB1, Bud, I want to ask, how much do you think is going to be put on his plate? What are your expectations for the way that Chip Kelly, don't forget, Chip Kelly is the offensive coordinator for this rock star Buckeyes team. How do you think they're going to utilize Howard's skill set within the context of this Ohio State offense and the personnel that surrounds it?
Chip, I think that Ohio State fans who enjoyed the Urban Meyer era and watched him run the quarterback as often as he did, before they had Justin Fields, are really going to enjoy the Will Howard experience. Will Howard is a guy who's a decent thrower. I think Ohio State believes that he's a clear upgrade over the quarterback they had last year, but I think his legs are also a differentiator for this team. Chip Kelly, obviously pretty notable for running some spread option concepts, a guy who likes to run the quarterback an awful lot. I mean, Will Howard he's got to be 23 or 24 years old at this point. This is a grown man in the backfield for Ohio State, handing off to two elite level running backs and some promising receiver talent. I've also seen reports on Bucknuts, our great 24/7 Sports Ohio State site, that they feel the offensive line is definitely improved this year. So I think Howard is a real upgrade for Ohio State. I think he'll fit in pretty nicely with what Chip Kelly and Ryan Day want to do.
Yeah, I think there was probably some concern about Will Howard having to take this long to be named the starting quarterback, but I think there are a number of factors involved in that. One is, as you mentioned, Chip, there's a lot of talent in that quarterback room. So it's like for anybody to just think they were going to walk in and be handed the job, even as a transfer with as much experience as Will Howard has, was probably asking a bit much. But I also think we have to consider, according to what Chip Kelly was saying today, the defense was making life tough on every single quarterback in that room, in practice and in camp. That is one of the best defenses in the country, and none of these guys were having a ton of success going against it. So I'm not surprised Will Howard ends up with the job. I think that this is a team that, like Bud was saying, they are going to lean more into the run game than we have seen in recent seasons. They're going to start, honestly, they couldn't beat Michigan, so they're trying to look a little bit more like Michigan to compete with Michigan along the lines of scrimmage and what they want to do as far as the physical nature of the offense. And I think it'll also help where Will Howard is really going to come in handy. This team struggled to score in the red zone last year. It's one of the reasons they brought in Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss, who's an excellent short yardage kind of back in the red zone. He was great with the Rebels. And Will Howard just gives them an element that they didn't have offensively last year because no defense was looking at Kyle McCord and saying, oh, we have to spy him and make sure he doesn't take off and get to the corner pylon for a touchdown. You do have to do that with Will Howard. He can roll out, he can make the pass, he can also just run it in. So I think that this offense with Will Howard, even if he's not a gigantic talent upgrade over Kyle McCord, will be far more effective, both from a style of play and the dynamism that they're going to have available to them.
Also, if you're Will Howard, what a group of receivers. Big body guy, like talk about pushing it down the field. Like Colin Klein did so much to be able to create an offense where everyone's versatility was used to create explosive plays. But when you think about Emeka Buka providing the leadership, what we've seen so far from a Carnell Tate, Brandon Ennis has taken more steps forward, and Jeremiah Smith continues to turn heads. I think that Will Howard has got to be thinking, what an opportunity for me that you'll hear in what is likely the final year of college football to be able to prove myself as a well-rounded quarterback that can get it done at the next level, because you got some wide receivers that are also going to be playing at the next level alongside you there in Columbus. All right, what about other quarterback battles that have not been settled yet? So, Tom, I'll throw this to you first because you've got your eye on a team with a very intimate relationship with the Ohio State Buckeyes. What quarterback battle have you been tracking and stands out to you the most?
Yeah, I just said Ohio State's trying to emulate Michigan's offense by being more physical. Well, Michigan's trying to emulate Ohio State by not knowing who its quarterback is. There has been a quarterback battle going on all offseason from the spring into the fall in Ann Arbor after J.J. McCarthy, who helped lead the Wolverines to a national title last year, is now in the NFL. Unfortunately, he suffered a knee injury and will be out for the year, but that's not really the Wolverines' problem right now. Their biggest situation is who's going to be our starter? Is it Alex Orji, Jack Tuttle, or is it even a Davis Warren or Jaden Denegal? All reports coming out seem to be that it's between Tuttle and Orji, which is an interesting comparison because it really is a question of what you want. Jack Tuttle, I'm not going to say he's a statue, but compared to Alex Orji, he's a statue. And we have seen Alex Orji get plenty of snaps in this offense last year. But what we didn't see Alex Orji do while playing for the Wolverines last year was throw the ball. He had pass options, but he never seemed to decide to throw it. He kept it and he ran, and he's a dynamic athlete. But can he run this offense as a passer or make it too predictable? So I do think at this stage, I don't know that Sharon Moore really knows who his starting quarterback is, which is a bad situation to be in this close to the start of the regular season. And unlike last year, where Michigan didn't play anybody in the non-conference, so they kind of had time. If this was last season, they would have had a runway to figure it out with game action. You've got that Texas game looming in the second week of the season. So Michigan needs to figure this out very quickly. And it's going to be interesting to see who it will be. If I had to pick one right now, I'd go 51% to 49% Jack Tuttle, but I've been very wrong before, and I plan to be very wrong again soon.
I am taking our conversation to Chapel Hill because this is a season where, Mac Brown came back and he was able to reignite the energy around North Carolina football. I mean, he brought them the dream of the 90s when they were up in the top 5, up in the top 10 and playing in major bowl games. But what has really helped Mac Brown's efforts is the fact that he's had an NFL quarterback for all 5 seasons. That is 3 years of Sam Howell. That is 2 years of Drake May. And now for the first time, he doesn't have that obvious NFL talent. And so as we're looking at the North Carolina Tar Heels and what they're going to be like in the post-Drake May era, the big concern is that the offense needs to find a quarterback, and a quarterback has not yet been found. Now, you do have Max Johnson, who has played at LSU and Texas A&M. So he has got 700 passes against SEC defense under his belt. You also have Connor Harrell, who played in the bowl game against West Virginia, and honestly, until he got hurt early in that game, showed some of the playmaking, which might give an advantage to him. Then there is, Jacoby Criswell, making his return to North Carolina after transferring out of the program, losing the battle to Drake May. So we've got 3 players where Jacoby Criswell is clearly running behind because he just arrived in the summer. But with Max Johnson, you have experience, but maybe not as much of the playmaking of Connor Harrell. Connor Harrell has the playmaking, but lacking the experience. And all of it is going to tie into, how North Carolina is going to perform offensively here in the post-Drake May era. But I am a little bit concerned because on the Cover 3 podcast, loyal listeners, they know all about Camp Buzz.
Players that are making a buzz. Camp Buzz.
And what you introduced to us today gave me a wrinkle to the season that I wasn't quite ready for. Why do you have your eyes on the Boise State quarterback battle?
Chip, I've got my eyes on it because Boise State is one of the few G5 programs that has a real shot to make this new 12-team college ball playoff. In fact, Boise is the favorite among all the G5 teams to make it. And they took former 5-star quarterback recruit Malachi Nelson from USC. And I think most people, including myself, just assumed that he would kind of walk in there and win that job. And he may still well win that job, but he hasn't won it yet. And quarterback Maddox Matson, who was okay for Boise last year, he's apparently taken a lot of reps with the one still. So that's a little concerning if you're of the mindset that Boise is head and shoulders above the rest of the Mountain West, which I know we'll see a lot of their games on CBS Sports Network this fall. But I don't know that Malachi is going to win this job. And if he doesn't, what does that offense look like? At that point, we're kind of banking on Boise State taking a real step up on defense. They were pretty poor on defense last year. What if they're just like a decent Mountain West team and they lose to Oregon and maybe they drop 1 or 2 more in conference? I was kind of thinking Nelson was going to elevate this quarterback room and elevate this offense, and that may or may not be the case.
Either somebody's playing coy or we got to start downgrading our Boise State, including myself after having picked the Broncos to be the unranked team to finish in the top 10 earlier in this show. Well, coming up on the other side, if you pay attention to the recruiting calendar, which obviously the diehard college football fans do, you always get a flurry of notable commitments right before the season starts. So we've got a very notable, albeit almost historic commitment for one program and a big-time offensive tackle who's going to be making a decision soon. We'll give you some big headlines from the recruiting trail and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Turning our eye to the recruiting trail where we've had a lot going on, especially at the offensive tackle position. Now, this stands out to me, Bud, because we don't see a lot of good tackles in the portal. This is not a position that you can just go and fix your issues every single offseason. You've got to identify these players coming out of high school. You've got to lock them down. So what in the world is Georgia Tech doing landing Josh Petty? Because Petty is a 5-star prospect, one of the top tackles in the class, and now committing to Georgia Tech is one of the highest rated prospects in Georgia Tech recruiting history. But please use all of your 24/7 sports recruiting intel. Make this make sense to us. How did Georgia Tech beat out the big dogs for Josh Petty?
Sure. So, Chip, a lot of things have to go right for Georgia Tech to land a 5-star offensive tackle. It is really rare. It's why we're talking about it on cable TV. But a lot of things did go right. Starting at the top, right? Coach Brent Key, Georgia Tech's head coach, he's a career offensive line coach. I think that established a really good relationship with Petty, who's a local prospect, right next to campus. They did a nice job building this relationship over time. And Georgia Tech is not always a big player in the NIL space, but it's been reported that he got just shy of $1 million, which is very, very high. And his dad kind of openly talked about how important NIL played in that. And if you're Georgia Tech, you have some money. It's just oftentimes you don't have players with the grades who you would pay that kind of crazy money to. So to get a guy who has the grades like Josh Petty, who has the academic aspirations like a Josh Petty, to be able to actually be interested in your school and then have the money to pay up for it, NIL. I mean, they beat out Florida State and Ohio State here, and that was huge. And for Ohio State, now we kind of turn the table to see, will they be able to get David Sanders, the 5-star offensive tackle who's committing on 24/7 Sports coming up? I know. I mean, Tennessee is my pick, but Ohio State, Georgia, some others there as well. Number 3 player in the country. For Ohio State, they're really rolling right now on the field, and looks like the practices are going great. But offensive tackle recruiting is a bit of a sore spot for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, David Sanders, you mentioned it right there. Number 1 offensive tackle in the class, according to 24/7 Sports. Number 3 player in the country, 6'6", 290 pounds. They don't make many humans like that. He's coming out of Charlotte, Providence Day School. So what has that battle been like? And you mentioned Tennessee's your pick here, and he will be committing on 24/7 Sports. So who else is in the mix trying to land David Sanders?
There are a lot of schools, and Chip, you're right. He is freaky. There's actually film of him playing receiver in practice at that size and mossing people. So, and he has been on a whirlwind tour. He has been to almost every major program out there, really made sure to check out what everybody was offering, if you catch my drift. And Tennessee, I think, is probably in the lead there, but Ohio State, Georgia, those are kind of the 3 that I'd keep a real close eye on. He did visit Nebraska. There was some legitimate interest there in Nebraska, but if I had to guess, I think Tennessee will be the hat he puts on, assuming he goes the kind of hat roulette route on the table come Saturday. But this is going to be a fascinating battle to the end because, as we mentioned, Ohio State just lost out on Josh Petty. Maybe do they show a little more interest in David Sanders, if you will?
Bud, you mentioned it earlier as far as Josh Petty going to Georgia Tech. I'm happy you brought up the fact that academics played a role, because we all know that offensive linemen are the smartest players on the field. So, of course, he wants to go to an elite academic institution such as Georgia Tech. As for Tennessee, if they land Sanders, though, and I want to know what your thoughts are on, this is a class that they've already landed one of the top quarterbacks in the country in the recruiting portal. They have Nico Iamaleava, who will be starting for them, who was one of the top quarterbacks in the country in his class. What kind of momentum are we seeing from Josh Heupel's program on the recruiting trail? Are the Vols kind of stepping into that stratosphere where they're their team we can look at and say, you know what, they might be competing for SEC titles here in the near future?
Tom, I think you're right. I think Tennessee really is on the come up here, that they're landing elite prospects at the real premium positions, if you will. And I think Tennessee has a lot of things rolling for it. They can cash it in, win 8, 9, maybe 10, 11 ball games this year. They could really have some.
Yep, 1:15 p.m. Eastern time. You can watch it on CBS Sports HQ, 24/7 Sports, giving you all the coverage that you need before, during, and after the commitment. Who's in the mix, what it means, your one-stop shop for all things from the recruiting trail. Well, coming up on the other side, we turn our attention back to the 2024 season and stacking up those teams from the Group of 5 conferences. There's one spot in the 12-team playoff that will be reserved for one of them. So how do they stack up against each other? We'll give you our list and more next. back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Well, it is that time of year where you've got to fill out your playoff bracket. Hey, yeah, we get to do bracketology now too. And one spot that you always have to decide when filling out your bracket is going to be who is going to be that team, the highest ranked champion from the group of 5 that will get an automatic bid to the College Football Playoff Invitational. So the only challenge here in this exercise is to just rank them. Just rank the top 5 group of 5 teams heading into the season. This is your starting point. Tom, I'll let you go first. What's your 5 look like?
Well, it's a team we've talked about a lot in the show already today, even though Bud took a bucket of cold water and dumped it over our heads. But I think the best group of 5 team in the country, based on what I know now, is Boise State. I think that if you look at the Mountain West, they are a head and shoulders above the rest of the league. We talked about it on the show earlier today on the Cover 3 podcast. We don't know what to make of that league outside of Boise State right now. And now we really don't know what to make of Boise State, but I still think the Broncos are going to be solid. After that, I've got Memphis, who is my favorite to win the American Athletic Conference. I think if you just look at the Tigers over the last few years, there's just a certain level of consistency and excellence that you've kind of come to expect from the program, even through numerous coaching changes. So I tend to give them the benefit of the doubt. And then I've got Liberty at 3, who is far and away the best program in Conference USA and will likely run away with that league. I think App State has a good shot to win the Sun Belt in what is a very competitive league, but has seen a lot of coaching turnover after last season. And then for my 5th spot, I'm taking a bit of a flyer here. I'm a big fan of South Florida quarterback Byron Brown, and I think that having an excellent quarterback in a G5 league like that is enough to sometimes get you to the top of the league. So I'm going to put the Bulls at number 5. I think they've got something for us.
Hey, Raleigh, North Carolina, stand up. Let's go, Byron Brown. He's also, for you gamers out there, incredible on NCAA 25 if you like going with a little dual threat quarterback wide open offense. He can get you those easy first downs. Now, Bud, we are hovering around a lot of the similar teams here, but you were able to come up with an example of a team that was a power conference team as recently as 1 year ago. So as you talk through your 5, I got to hear about the love that you've got for the Pac-2.
Absolutely. So, Chip, on my list, I do have Boise number 1 still. Ashton Jeanty is an awesome running back. Number 2, as Tom mentioned, Memphis I have as well. I think the commonality there is that both Boise and Memphis have some real NIL money to play with, and they're able to keep a lot of their studs. There's a whole lot of teams out there who would have wanted Seth Hennigan, the quarterback at Memphis, but Boise was able to pony up with that partnership with FedEx. No free ads, but that FedEx is helping Memphis out a little bit with their NIL stuff. Liberty, the same thing. Liberty probably has more NIL money than the rest of Conference USA combined, so I would expect them to go undefeated yet again. They have Caden Salter, who was a Tennessee level recruit and just ran into a little trouble there, and has been a great reclamation project for Jamie Chadwell there at Liberty. Number 4 is Washington State. I wasn't sure if I was cheating here or not, but they're not. I guess they're technically kind of Power 5-ish, but technically not. They're already in the Pac-12 championship game, as is Oregon State. So I just look at them and say, okay. I looked at the roster. I talked to Jamie Vinnick, or Washington State 24/7 Sports site. They didn't lose that much off last year's team, with the exception of Cam Ward, who is now transferred to Miami at quarterback. I still think they're better than most of the Mountain West teams that they'll play, and certainly in better shape than what Oregon State is after Oregon State lost damn near their entire roster. And then 5 is App State, which I like, and if they can continue the defensive improvement they had over the kind of final 6-7 games of last season, that would be great. And I thought about a couple more teams there too, man. Texas State was in the conversation. I think Tulane could be pretty good. There's probably 8 or 9 that we should be picking from, but to me the top 3, top 4 are kind of similar. Yeah.
Yeah, man, Tom's so smart, Bud's so smart, because it's the same top 3 that I've got too. All right, so we're going Boise State at number 1. We're going Memphis at number 2. All right, I am throwing a little bit of a curveball. I'm going to go with App State here at number 3. The thing that I like about App State is the willingness to go and test yourself against the best programs, and the way that Sean Clark's team has performed when they do test themselves against some of the best programs in the country. I have Liberty at number 4. There's just such a talent and coaching advantage that the Flames are able to have, where I just don't know who's going to stop that offense, where yes, Caden Salter is a dual threat, but they just run the daggum football really well. And then rounding out my 5, I'm going with the one that is perhaps the biggest question mark, because Fresno State under Jeff Tedford has been so consistent, so solid, a high floor proposition. But Jeff Tedford retires for health reasons, this offseason. So I don't know exactly how to downgrade the Bulldogs or how to reevaluate the Bulldogs, but the pieces are still there for, I think, Fresno State to be one of those next best teams in the Mountain West along the way. But I'll just go ahead and throw that one at you. Where do you sit with the Bulldogs? If Tedford is gone, how do you adjust your rating of them compared to those other non-Boise teams in the Mountain West?
Absolutely, Chip. I had to adjust them down a little bit because Jeff Tedford is one of the very best coaches of our generation. I mean, look what he did at Cal. Look what he did, in both stints at Fresno State. I think that is an important loss, but yet they do return a lot of big pieces for this team. I had them before Tedford stepped down slightly above UNLV, and now I've moved them basically from a power rating standpoint, basically tied with UNLV, which is more than a field goal lower than Boise State, assuming Boise State plays to a certain level, as we've discussed a lot on this show. If they don't, then it's anybody's ball game. So I'm sure we'll watch on CBS Sports Network this fall.
Yeah, let's take a look at all of our selections for the top 5. You can see the commonality. You can see what stands out along the way. Tom, Bud just offered a couple of teams that, didn't quite make his cut. Who else was on your list that maybe didn't quite make the top 5?
Going back to the Sun Belt, we've got App State, all 3 of us, but I do wonder, James Madison obviously suffered a lot of losses with Kurt Signetti leaving for Indiana and taking players with him, but that is a talented roster. Troy loses John Sumrall to Tulane, but that was a strong team. I think South Alabama, Georgia Southern, Georgia State, even, these are all teams I think in the Sun Belt could take a small step forward and maybe get in the conversation. Outside of Liberty and Conference USA, I really don't see a path for anybody. Maybe Jacksonville State, again, has an excessive season and performs well. Other than that, I would say Bud mentioned Tulane, which is where John Sumrall ended up. I think that's a good shot. And I would say UTSA is another team that I think is just kind of hovering around the perimeter there that has a chance to take a step forward, even after losing guys like Frank Harris.
Yeah, we took UTSA and, we had them, thinking that they were just going to run the American Athletic Conference. SMU goes undefeated in conference play, wins the league on the way out. Now is a time, I would think, for UTSA to try to go to make that run and be on our radar very quickly for one of those spots in the college football playoff. Now, in the expanded college football playoff bracket, the top 4 conference champions, they get a bid right in the quarterfinals. You skip the first round altogether thanks to that bye, so it's going to make winning the conference championship all the more important. So our challenge is to pick one team that we are the most confident in winning their power conference. We'll tell you the answers and why next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Well, at CBS Sports and 24/7 Sports, the Cover 3 podcast. I mean, this time of year, we are just getting peppered for expert picks left and right. Catch them on CBSSports.com. But sometimes there's different levels of confidence to this. So I want to know, what is the most confident? We are wanting one power conference champion that when you pick it, you feel the most confident that they will win their conference. So, Tom Fornelli, of all the 4 power conferences, we've got to pick a conference championship for every single one of them. We've turned in our picks already. Which one do you feel the most confident that at the beginning of December, they'll be hoisting a trophy in their conference championship game?
I wish we weren't just picking power conferences, because then there'd be a very easy answer and I could just quickly yell Liberty's going to win Conference USA, winning every game by 20 points per game. But no, you had to go and make things complicated and limit it to Power 4s, which frankly was a lot more difficult to come up with a clear answer than I expected. Because if you look at the Big 12, I think the consensus is everybody's picking Utah or Kansas State, but nobody knows who's going to win that league. They're all the same team. It could be any single one of them. So I think that, that's impossible. The ACC, you've got Clemson, Florida State, Miami, all three of whom I think are just as capable of winning the league as anybody else. So I can't go with the ACC, which leaves me with the SEC and the Big Ten, who are the two best leagues in the country. And I'm supposed to say, oh, yeah, this team's going to just fly right through. I'm super confident they're going to win it, but I am confident in Ohio State winning the Big Ten, simply because when I do look at the Big Ten this year, I think it is a 3-4 team race at most. And I think that once you get past those top 4 teams, there's really nobody else that can compete with those squads. So I look at Ohio State. I look at the collection of talent they have. I look at the mission that they're on, having not won the conference in each of the last 3 years. And I think that the Buckeyes are the team that I am most confident in to win a Power 4 conference. Although when I say confident, I'd say 40% confident.
Tom, I think that's probably the smart pick, but I'm going to argue Georgia for a couple reasons. One, I do think that the gap between Ohio State and Oregon is smaller than the gap between Georgia and whatever the second best team you might think is in the SEC, whether it's Ole Miss or Alabama or Texas or Missouri or Tennessee or whoever you think it is. So Tennessee, okay, bingo. So Georgia has a much better quarterback than Ohio State with Carson Beck. If he stays healthy, I think you should have relative confidence they make it to the SEC title game. And I think they'll be a bigger favorite in the SEC title game than Ohio State would be, assuming it is Ohio State and Oregon in that game, as they're the prohibitive favorites to be the two contestants out of the Big Ten. So I'll go Georgia because I have more confidence they can win if they can get there. But I mean, clearly Ohio State's a pretty smart pick because they're not a lock, but darn close to a lock to actually make it to the Big Ten title game.
Yeah, but this is hilarious, right? Because we are choosing from the two best conferences in all of college football, where the teams at the top are like national title contenders. 8 of the top 10 teams in the preseason AP Top 25 are from these two conferences. And we're like, yeah, these are the conferences where I am the most confident. But it is that Power 2. And I'm not talking about the Power 2 conferences. I am talking about those two teams that you all have mentioned, Ohio State and Georgia. And this is when I've got to get into the beep, beep, boop, bop, bop, beep, Chipalytics to tell you that the urgency that exists under the seat of one Ryan Day is going to be the X factor and the splitting of hairs when it comes to a lot of decisions, including the team that will win their conference. I've got Ohio State as the team that I am the most confident in winning their conference because they have to win their conference. You just let the Michigan Wolverines win this thing 3 years in a row after you dominated the rivalry and after you dominated the conference, and now it's time for a return. It's why you invest in the roster upgrades. It's why you invest in the roster retention. And so while Georgia has its own chip on the shoulder, right, along the way, I think it's Ohio State that I will go as my pick. Well, if you enjoyed this, oh, buddy, we got a lot more for you because you can watch the Cover 3 podcast live every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern time at youtube.com/cover3. But we're not just a live product, we're on demand as well. You can get us on YouTube or you can download wherever you get your podcasts. This week, we've done SEC win totals. That's right, breaking down over-under win totals for every team in the Southeastern Conference. Next week, we've got the Big Ten on deck, and it finishes with our win totals locks, where we give you our very best win totals picks for the upcoming season. So come and hang out. Download the Cover 3 podcast wherever you get your podcasts.